This is the first time I'm really talking about this topic in public, in English. And so it may be a little too many details, but hopefully you come across getting something that you can bite on. I know people are at different levels of learning. People have different interests, but if you can come away with something that can help your spiritual path, I would feel like I have done my job. Anyway, so it's my first attempt to talk about this, partly stemming, so that the theme is self-esteem or healthy self. And this is a key word today. And because it sounds like it contradicts the teaching of non-self, And this is a concern, I think, is of Buddhism in general in the modern period, and especially in America. So let me go here. So I want you to either look at this or look at your outline, and when I say 1, 2, 3, you can see. You can read it following. Okay, let's try. So aim of the seminar. Okay, so 1, we are. Can you?
Also, most people consider self-esteem to be a good thing, so we try to nurture it in our children. How then should we think about these seeming contradictions? This seminar will attempt to answer these pressing questions as Buddhism continues to make inroads into contemporary.
Okay, great.
Sensei, I'm using the mic so that on the recording they can hear what's being said.
Oh, okay, great. No, that's helpful. Okay, so this is the aim of the seminar and what I want to deal with. And I wonder if any of you have, felt this kind of contradiction. I know some of you have expressed, at least 1 or 2 persons have expressed this to me, and I feel it is an important issue to at least begin to address. And this actually came up at a Pacific seminar, BC Pacific seminar, and in which we had speakers who were, expressing a very strong orthodox or traditional view. And I felt that is, of course, important, but we also need to understand that the context in which the teaching is being taught, and especially in America, because American culture is obviously different from Japanese culture. And so I know both cultures very well. I've lived in Japan for half my life, and I know how Shin Buddhism is taught. And it works for them, for Japan, but it doesn't necessarily work exactly the same way when presented traditionally. So, and at the Pacific seminar, I brought some of these issues up, and then Reverend John liked it, and he says, well, maybe the seminar could be on self-esteem. And I said, right on, using the phrase from the 60s, those of you who are that old enough, right on. And so anyway, I may get into trouble with some of the traditionalists in BCA, but I'm willing to always talk and discuss these issues. And as you know, I'm getting off the subject a little bit, but some of you know in Japan, there's a huge controversy going on in the Honganji. There is a statement called Ryogemon, Statement of Faith, or Shinjin, that's been written by Renyo Shonin and been recited, for 400, 500 years, and then they came up with a new one, new Ryogemon, and 85% of the people hate it, and they're all kind of opposing it, and there's been a huge controversy that has kept. So I talked about this to the Southern District ministers when they asked me to give an online seminar. But anyway, I think it doesn't concern us so much because we don't really recite the Ryogemon or that statement of faith so much. But anyway, the reason why I bring it up is that there is a attempt to really make Shin Buddhism more relevant, also in Japan, because they realize that they need to also change. And the Monshu, the head minister of the Honganji, came up with this new one. So he obviously wants to change, but there's been a strong backlash against it. Now, of course, there's a problem with this new Ryogemon. He has some doctrinal issues and problems. But I personally feel that the attempt to, update it is very important. And so this too is an attempt to update it, especially for the American context. So anyway, okay, so non-self is a key Buddhist term, as you know. And this is very complicated, and it can be misunderstood, as I will point out. And so Buddhism basically talks about, promotes non-self, but it seems to go against self-esteem and individualism. And so the question is how to reconcile that. So does it really, do the two really, well, I'm going to be using the word self-esteem and healthy self. So these two terms are basically synonymous, and maybe healthy self is a broader term than self-esteem. And there's also ego. Can you get a better felt pen? What? Oh, okay. So ego is part of this, not the same, but ego is one of the elements of self-esteem. And so and I'm going to get to the conclusion. Before that, this statement that I also cited at the Dharma talk is kind of the foundational sacred passage for today. And essentially, all this talk means nothing unless we get to this feeling of, oh, how happy I am. So can you recite it? 1, 2, 3.
Oh, how happy I am. My mind and heart are planted in the soil of universal vow of Amida, and I allow my thoughts and aspirations to flow in the inconceivable Dharma ocean.
Okay, so this is a passage that is very emotional, passionate, which is kind of rare in his writings, and it goes to the very heart of what he realized in his life. And so this is the aim for all of us, is to come to this kind of a conclusion or understanding and appreciation. Okay, so I have devised a metaphor of pole vaulting. Metaphor. Okay, it should be pole vaulting metaphor. But anyway. So, so the non-self, and these seem contradictory, but they're really not contradictory. There are they represent two stages of the one process, two different stages. So, using this metaphor, the non-self it has to do with when you start going up and go over the bar, and then especially the pole represents ego. And if you want to get over the bar, you have to let go of the ego, right? You got to let go of the hand, go over. In order to go over, going over is the Buddhist awakening. In Jodo Shinshu, what is it called? Buddhist awakening in Jodo Shinshu is called Shinjin. So if you don't know, please learn Shinjin. It's often translated true in trusting, but I translated Shinjin realization and entrusting. Entrusting is important, but Shinjin realization. So there's an awakening dimension to it, and then entrusting. So Shinjin realization and trusting. This is the Jodo Shinshu awakening, which is represented by going over the bar. Okay, when you go over the bar, you have to let go of the pole, and that's what it means. That's the meaning of non-self. Okay, so then where is self-esteem and healthy ego? Well, they are found at the stage in which the man is dashing towards the pole. You need to dash. It requires energy, effort, and a purposefulness to move ahead, and that's the stage of where self-esteem and healthy self function. So both are important. So in a temple like ours, in a temple where you have children, you have mostly lay people. For all of us in the Sangha, we are dealing with both levels. And so what happens with traditional interpretation or emphasis is that it emphasizes only the part of going over the bar. That's why there's so much talk about, letting go and non-self, but the earlier phase is just as important for the total process, the whole picture. And okay, so can you read this section? 1, 2, 3. The
ultimate goal of Buddhism. It is awakening, realizing Buddhahood, Nirvana, Bodhi, Shinjin, Kensho, stream, enterer, etc. Buddhism is a religion of awakening. Awaken to the truth expressed in the metaphor of the wave and ocean.
Okay, so awakening, and these terms, nirvana, bodhi, and maybe not kensho and stream enter, but for Jodo Shinshu it's shinjin. Okay, so Buddhism, especially Jodo Shinshu, sometimes is mixed or confused or thought of it as like Christianity, that it's a religion of faith only. It's not just faith, there's awakening to it. Well, what do you awaken to? And one of the best metaphors that I can think of is this one, the wave and the ocean. Okay, so this is not found in any of the traditional Buddhist texts, but I just, in a contemporary context, it's really easy to understand, and so we awaken to the fact that we are a wave, okay? We are a wave. But we are not, autonomous. We are connected to the great ocean. So that's the interconnectedness part of it. So awaken to the truth that I as a wave is connected to the huge ocean. Without the ocean, we would not exist. So ocean could be, things from the water that we drink, the food that we partake, even the friendship that we have, which provides the mental, wherewithal, the strength to live our lives. I mean, most of us here, we are now full-grown adults, and you didn't get here by yourself. I mean, obviously with, the physical things like food and air and etc., but mentally, it was because of the nurturing people, for most of it's our parents or grandparents, who loved us and who cared for us and who gave us the self-esteem to grow, in a decent fashion. None of us are perfect, but we, the fact that we are here means that we have been blessed by that kind of support. And so that's the interdependence part. Okay, one of the truths of Buddhism in general is this interdependence. I also talk in another book or also elsewhere, big, think big, life is a bumpy road, life is interdependent. And the second, there's another I, B-I-I-G. G is life can be great. But the two I's in the middle, one is interdependent, which is exactly what I just talked about. Mostly we are dependent on the ocean. The second one, impermanence. Now you heard that. So Buddhist, so the wave is that it's not static, it's constantly moving, right? So you are a wave now, and this wave will slowly but surely go towards the beach and get smaller and smaller, and eventually it will disappear. But you will be returned or become part of the great wave, and then probably, and from the Buddhist perspective, not probably, you will generate new waves. And so it's this kind of a cycle. But anyway, so when I say Buddhism is a religion of awakening, you awaken to the fact that I am a wave, I am one, interconnected, interdependent with a wave. Two, we are impermanent. If you understand these two well with a total being, your life will change. Because, we're not going to be here forever. That's the real fact. And if you fully understand that, you won't, waste your time on, frivolous things. You want to live in the moment and live fully and deal with people that you love, fully and care for them. And so that's the wave in the ocean. So please keep this in mind because it's a very good metaphor. So when people say, what do you awaken to? Well, I am a wave, and I as a wave am interconnected, interdependent, and impermanent. And that is what you awaken to. Now, the present tradition. Oh, okay. Let's read next one. 1, 2, 3.
Traditional presentation fails to place the role of Buddhism within the overall framework of the lives of contemporary people. What has changed since the ancient, medieval, and even pre-modern periods? The prominence of the self or the individual, the reasons, longer life expectancy, greater economic affluence, better educated, democratic values, and individual rights.
Okay, so in modern times, especially contemporary time, the importance of the self is become much more enhanced, and that's because of these reasons. I mean, you look at our lives. We live much longer. We're economically better off. Even with all the inflation and all that, we are much more affluent, and we can therefore control our lives, and and carry on and seek the kind of life we want to lead to a greater extent than any time in the history of humankind for large numbers of people. And democratic values, especially in America, and sense of individualism is so strong. And so obviously the self or the individual plays a much more greater. So going back to the, I should. So the man with the. Okay, I wasn't gonna draw, but I should have. Anyway, okay. So this is in a way, the essence of Buddhism is here. I'm repeating myself. But this part is the realm in which the self-esteem and healthy ego needs to be acknowledged. And we have a greater sense of human development better because of the development of psychology. So can you read this section? The
emergence of has given us a better understanding of our mental dimensions, especially with regard to human development. Developmental psychology, Jean Piaget, Erik Erikson, Abraham Maslow, etc. Pre-personal to personal to transpersonal, transpersonal, which is preceded by the pre-personal, infants and children, and the personal.
Okay, thank you. So, how many of you have majored in psychology? Oh, okay. And how many of you are involved in psychotherapy or counseling or anything like that? Oh, okay. We have some people. Good. So you are well aware of the huge development of, the insights derived from psychology in the 20th century and now in the 21st century. And there are different kinds of psychology. There's the behavioral psychology, the psychoanalysis of Freud, and then there is the what's called transpersonal psychology. And so anyway, to Jean Piaget and Erik Erikson, and to some extent Abraham Maslow, they talk about development. And so my friend Moriya Okano, who is a scholar in Japan, and I actually want to dedicate my talk to him because he and we started, and another person, we started a Japanese Association of Study of Buddhism and Psychology in Japan in 2008. And he's a dear colleague of mine, and he's recently developed Parkinson's disease. And I'm very disheartened to see it. But he's the one that really got me interested in the interplay between psychology and Buddhism when I went to Japan. And he kind of wrote a book called Self and Non-Self. And essentially this diagram is, so, pre-personal is like from infant to adolescent. And then the personal is the level of adults. And so we go through pre-personal level, and then the personal level, and then the transpersonal. But the psychology, what's the difference between psychology and Buddhism or religion? Well, psychology basically, simply put, it helps people to function in the world, to be a social person, a person of society. But religion goes beyond that, and so transpersonal is another form of psychology that is very strong in the U.S., especially in California. It started with people from California, and it actually overlaps. Transpersonal overlaps with religion because it goes beyond the ego. And And so Buddhism, we have to place it, earlier I talked about two different levels, but Buddhism in its essence, so Buddhism has different aspects of it, which I will talk about, but awakening, Shinjin, is at the transpersonal level. So even from a psychological diagram like this, you can see that Buddhism is on a, in a way, higher level than the personal level. Although I hate to use hierarchical term, I just think it's different levels of development, and I guess I have to affix some kind of value to it because I'm essentially ultimately, think Buddhism is the ultimate goal, that it is a higher level. But my argument is that personal and transpersonal form a set. They come as a set. But in traditional Buddhism, we tend to, look down on the personal, saying, "Oh, that's self-esteem, that's healthy self, that's ego, and we got to reject it." So my point is, especially in America, we have to include both. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Awakening in Buddhism corresponds to the transpersonal phase. Psychology deals primarily with the pre-personal and the personal phases, 3 kinds of psychology: behavioral, psychoanalysis, and humanistic or transpersonal. Psychology and the various therapies and counseling are concerned with helping us to function effectively as members of a society.
Okay, I've already addressed some of this points. But I'm going to be repeating certain things over and over again because we all need to hear it over and over again, and it helps me to also as well. So I think this part is basically what I just said earlier, and counseling is what psychology and psychotherapy does is to help people function in the world, and but Buddhism kind of, in a way, goes beyond it. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Self-esteem, or healthy self, is needed for our well-being. Self-love or self-esteem is needed to function well in life, especially social life. Individuation, a psychological process whereby a child develops a distinct identity and sense of self, Carl Jung. Better able to cope with adversity, have a more positive outlook on life. Without it, a person struggles with feelings of inadequacy, lack of confidence, and even self-hatred. Narcissistic persons suffer from low self-esteem.
Okay, so we are talking about this level right here, the personal level. And again, Buddhism tends to kind of criticize it as not as important, something to get rid of it. But it's necessary to function well in society. And then the human nature, the process of development, inherently involves a process called individuation. This is a technical term used by Jung, and it is a tendency or need for people to develop a distinct identity and a sense of self. And American culture very much supports this. Not so much in Japan. That's where there's a cultural difference. And I think it's important for healthy self to acknowledge the fact that the sense of identity and distinctiveness is part of what is important for a healthy self. And then with better self-esteem, and I don't need to go into detail about this, but anyone who has a healthy self can deal with adversities, and they're much more positive about life, and And conversely, if you are feeling inadequate, lack of self-confidence, and you can even develop self-hatred. So narcissism, is where we usually say he's very narcissistic, and someone who just talks about himself or herself. And at the core of the reason for that is that he or she does not have self-confidence. They have not been given self-love. They haven't been able to cultivate self-love. So this is very obvious in psychology and developmental psychology. Okay, so next.
Basic difference between Buddhism and psychology. An interesting happening at the founding of the Japanese Association for the Study of Buddhism and Psychology in 2008. Attachment. Psychology has a positive meaning. Attachment nurtures self-love or self-esteem in the infant or child. Buddhism has a negative meaning. Attachment equals 3 poisons, or GAS, leads to suffering.
Okay. In 2008, I alluded to earlier that Professor Okano and another person, we started this association. And at the initial meeting, it was very interesting because we had the psychology people and then the Buddhist people, and we had a difference of opinion. So when it came to attachment, the psychologists said attachment is good. And then Buddhists said attachment is bad. And so that really came to fore the difference between the interpretation of attachment. Because attachment for a child to grow is essential. A child, an infant, needs to have emotional attachment to the caregiver, and without that, one doesn't develop self-esteem and self-love, and so that became clear. On the other hand, for us Buddhists, we say attachment is bad. Attachment is 3 poison. We have to get rid of it. And when it comes to attachment, you had a famous Buddhist American joke. Why couldn't the Buddha vacuum under the sofa? Anybody? Yes, he couldn't because he had no attachments. Okay, so it goes to the heart of Buddhism, clinging. But actually, there's another version that I kind of developed maybe. When you send email messages to people and you say, I'm attaching this file, well, you forget maybe 1/4 of the time. And they say, so the other person says, hey, you said you have attachment, you forgot. And then you answer, oops, I'm just trying to be a good Buddhist. Okay. So anyway, the difference in the two, and that's because attachment is needed for here, especially at the pre-personal level, and otherwise you cannot develop fully. But attachment here is not good because then you cannot go over the bar. You're grabbing onto the ego, and so that's the difference. Okay?
The teaching of non-self or no self in Buddhism is meant to foster non-attachment to the self or ego. This can be seen in the phrase, not taking ourselves too seriously. Non-self or no self does not mean that the self doesn't exist in the ordinary, everyday, conventional sense. My initial misunderstanding about this teaching during my early high school years, when I went around thinking Ken Tanaka doesn't exist. The Buddha, in his last sermon, admonished us to make yourself the lamp and make the Dharma the lamp. Virtually all Buddhist sutras begin with the phrase, thus I have heard.
Okay, so a non-self is often misunderstood to mean I don't exist, ontologically. well, kind of big word, So Buddhism actually is not so much concerned with objective reality like what science seeks. But it's more concerned ultimately how to overcome suffering. And so when it says non-self, it doesn't mean that I don't exist, conventional. So, when I was in high school, when I really didn't fully understand this teaching, I said, oh, Ken Tanaka doesn't exist. But that's a misunderstanding. I exist. If I hit you, you're going to hurt. And if you hit me, you'll hurt. And the sutras talk about I, like Buddha at the end of his last sermon, he says, make yourself the lamp and make the Dharma the lamp. So yourself the lamp. And all the sutras begin with, thus I have heard. So I have heard. So what non-self means is to non-attachment, or, this sense, the ordinary phrase, not taking ourselves too seriously, goes to the heart of what the teaching of non-self is trying to do. For example, I'm just thinking, if you are in charge of some project here at the temple, and you work really hard, and it goes okay, but not everybody, says it was successful, or maybe some people may kind of complain, and so you're kind of hurt. And that's an example of taking yourself and your action too seriously. So, don't be attached to what people say about what you did. And if you are attached, you will suffer. But if you can learn to let go, then, you don't suffer as much. So not taking yourself too seriously, or what you do too seriously. You do it because you're committed, you want to do it, and just do it. So it's that kind of letting go of your ego. And so that's the key. Of course, it's easier said than done. Okay?
Non-self, anatman, means that I am not a completely autonomous and unchanging self, or atman. Instead, we are conditional, since we are sustained by conditioned that involves others, people, other beings, and inanimate things in nature. Further, we are constantly changing physically and mentally. We are like a wave in the ocean. The wave cannot exist separately from the ocean. The wave is constantly changing.
Okay, there's a kind of a typo here. It says, instead we are conditional since we are sustained by condition so it doesn't quite make sense. So I want to change to, instead we are dependent since we are involved with others. But okay, so kind of a little too wordy, but essentially it's saying we are conditioned by others because we are dependent on other people, other beings, inanimate things in nature, etc. And so we are constantly changing physically and mentally. And this is, again, repeating, we said earlier, that the wave is constantly changing, constant and then interconnected. I will want to say about interconnected. Often we say, we are connected and therefore we are grateful, right? I mean, in Jodo Shinshu, we emphasize part of it. And that's important as well. But there's another dimension where, because we are conditioned, that's the kind of Buddhist term called Sanskrita in Sanskrit, conditioned, that's actually kind of leads to suffering. Why does it lead to suffering? Because we don't have control. That's the result of interdependence. It's usually in a positive sense, but interconnected means that, we are not able to control our destiny, especially in terms of age, aging, illness, and death. Okay, so interconnected has that meaning which we should keep in mind. Aside from the fact that we are also supported by them, and therefore we should feel grateful. Okay, let's go.
This means that we experience suffering because we cannot fully control what happens to us. While a healthy self or self-esteem is needed to function as a social being, it contains suffering because the self becomes old, gets sick, and inevitably dies. And healthy self or self-esteem does indeed involve pride, mana, which is one of the blind passions, along with the 3 poisons that Buddhism rejects as obstacles to awakenings. Shakyamuni
Gas
Buddha
plus
okay, GAS plus P or pride is gasp. And Shinran Shonin experienced this suffering to an enormous degree. So they began to search for solutions to overcome their suffering.
Okay, so now I've been saying that this is a good thing. I mean, it's good for developing healthy individual. And American culture emphasizes this. But this is where we have the limitations of self-esteem or healthy self. And because this self becomes old, gets sick, and will inevitably die. And that's where, when Buddhism seriously begins to start to kick in. Here, pride. Pride is important. We need to be proud in being Buddhist, and proud to be American, whatever. And it strengthens our I think a sense of individualism, but it has its weakness. That's where Buddhism begins to kick in. And actually, pride is one of the 6 major passions, blind passions, or afflictions. We all know about gas, right? You all should know gas. Greed, anger, and stupidity, or, the different versions of it. Someone in my class brought up, added P, because pride can also lead to suffering. And so we get gasp. Now I thought, hey, this is wonderful. I'm going to use it. This lady named Kathy Kaufman from Honolulu, who's taking my class, brought this up, and I said, okay, I'm going to use it, but I will always mention your name. And she goes, thank you. But I said, don't be too proud. Don't get caught up in pride. But anyway, so I think it's another thing. Gas is great, but gasp, oh no, gasp. So, because pride is good at this stage, but in order to get over the bar, it is an obstacle. And who discovered that? Shakyamuni Buddha, Shinran Shonin, and all the great Buddhist teachers. They discovered that the healthy self itself is not enough. Self-esteem is enough. So they began to seek solution. And that's where we get the teachings. Okay? When
they're aware, answer.
Oh, okay. Let me stop. Jim, what's wrong? Is something wrong with the mic? So
Testing. Okay, back now.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, why don't you start again for the
Yes.
yeah.
When they finally In our pole vaulting metaphor, this is essential in order to go over the bar, which represents awakening. If the pole represents our attachment to the ego, one must let go of the pole.
Okay. So you're at the right-hand side of it, and so Shinran Shonin and Shakyamuni Buddha, they take the path, they make the decision to go over the bar, and they, they practice, and at the end, they both let go of the pole. That's where the non-self, full non-self kicks in or materializes. So I think, hopefully, let go of the self, let go of the ego. And this goes to the heart of the Buddhist awakening. Okay?
Metaphor of pole vaulting. Dashing with the pole equals pre-personal and personal phases. The importance of a healthy self is likened to a pole vaulter dashing and utilizing the pole. This is the personal stage. Awakening in Buddhism is likened to completing the effort to go over the bar, the third transpersonal stage.
Okay. Oh, there's more? Oh. Okay. So, again, this is summarizing. Again, I'm repeating over and over for you so that you'll sink in. And transpersonal, the third stage, transpersonal psychology, I just remember some of the people like Ken Wilber. Have you heard? Some of you may have Ken Wilber. He is still, he's even younger than me, but he's a giant in this field. And he's an American who really, pushed and promoted this transpersonal psychology. And so anyway, so transpersonal psychology and awakening Buddhism, they overlap. Okay, so, okay. All right?
Not everyone seeks or succeeds in going over the high bar. Some of them strive to go over lower bars in keeping with their interests and abilities. And still others do not go over any bar, but simply proceed forward under the bar. Buddhist temples include members who are all of the above, so need to keep that in mind when running the organization.
Okay, so this is, I think you'll find interesting, and this is the first time I kind of thought about this in depth, is that Shakyamuni Buddha, Shinran Shonin, all these great masters, they really made the effort. They went over the bar. And that's why as Buddhists, we're supposed to follow in their footsteps. And the temples are built to do that. But not everyone goes over the same level of the bar. I can see some people going over a lower bar, and probably myself is definitely at a lower bar. But I personally feel like I'm going over some bar. But there are others in the Sangha who do not go over any bar, but simply proceed forward under the bar. Can you imagine? So I thought it was kind of cute, So you're dashing, and they said, well, okay, Shinran Shonin, Shakyamuni, they jumped over, but I'm just going to keep going ahead and go right under the bar and keep going the rest of my life. And there are many people like that at OCBC. No? And there are in any organization, any Buddhist group. And so there are different kinds of Buddhists. And I'm saying that from a traditional Buddhist in Japan may say, oh, they're not real Buddhists. They're being detrimental to Buddhism. But I think in America especially, we need to embrace them And hopefully that, further down the road, they'll go to the bar. But even if they don't, I think that, they're not any worse for it. I think they could be just as decent people. And that's the thing. Sometimes we develop this, spiritual ego that, we got the answer and these people are not interested, so they're inferior. And so there are different kinds of B Buddhists. You know the B Buddhists? Oh, okay. So anybody with Buddhists? So any kind of Buddhist that begins with a B, one is basketball Buddhist. And we know that, at OCBC, you have many people who come because of their interest in basketball. And I know that, that's true in a lot of places. How about bingo Buddhists? Where I used to minister in Southern Alameda County Buddhist Church, on Friday nights, there are all kinds of, 300 people come, and great fundraiser. And so bingo Buddhists, okay, bazaar Buddhists. And there are people who come to the temple, they connect up at bazaars, and they feel very, empowered to come to a temple and take part of it, and So what else can you think of? I can think of, I thought of this one, Bon Buddhist. Bon is Obon, dancing Buddhist. And this is huge. I mean, I think more than the Dharma, Obon dance has attracted so many people from the community. And it's really one of the draws of Shin Buddhism. And okay, what else? Oh, I thought of board. Board Buddhists. Those, many of them were came up to the front, board Buddhists. And there are some people who are not as interested in the spiritual dimension, but they're interested in running the temple, and they're needed as well. Unfortunately, they're often the leaders, but they don't necessarily step into the hondo. That was the case in my SSCBC when I was there, that half of the board members hardly ever came to the temple. And so I complained, but, who am I? Just a lowly minister, right? And that's the nature of Buddhist temples. But you keep trying, And maybe something like this, not the bored Buddhist, the bored Buddhist. Bored, yeah, is that right? No, B-O-A. You don't need it? Bored. Okay, certainly there's nobody here that fits here, right? You're not bored, you're enthused, that's why you're here. Okay, anybody? Oh, I know. Book Buddhists. And there are people who come and study with, Wandra Sensei and Turner Sensei. They come and they really study, and, they like to study and book. Recently, I was listening to a video of people who are drawn to temple because of donuts. So donut doesn't quite get it, so I thought of bagel Buddhists. Yeah, I think food is a way to the man's heart, right? But food is a way to religion, and it's true. So anyway, I'm being kind of lighthearted here, but in truth, these are they point to the dashing part, the self-esteem part, the worldly part, the individual part. And in a way, today I think it was Reverend Turner, where you were talking about someone a Jodo Shinshu person who attended a Zen seminar or seminar or retreat, and they really, talk about essence of Buddhism and enlightenment and awakening, but they come back to ordinary life and they have to face reality. But I think the Jodo Shinshu has that part cornered. We have that householder lifestyle. You know that of all the Japanese Buddhism, only school that has had a long years of married clergy is Jodo Shinshu. So it is the unique part of Jodo Shinshu. It's family-oriented, household-oriented, and the ministers are married. And so that it makes it. So in a way, I think that we can, at the personal level or the psychological level or the self-esteem level, that can also is part of the process. Of course, after the break, I'll talk more about that. We just can't give way just to, secular views about the householder life. We have to, of course, bring Buddhism. But anyway, please, I'm sure you understand that some people may not want to go over, not interested in going over. In fact, if you take an analogy of a hill or a mountain, in any given organization or even a temple, people who are sincerely interested at the essence, the higher, the awakening, will probably constitute only very few. The majority of the people are not as concerned, and that's the nature of reality. And you can, this can be demonstrated by research, surveys done in Japan and the U.S. and a lot of people who are involved in Buddhism religion are more people here, and they're not necessarily thinking of themselves to attain this. Even though we cannot compromise, this is the essence of our existence of the temple. I'm not saying that we compromise this. This has to be there, and this has to be the goal. But at the same time, if we just emphasize this and in a way belittle others who are at this level, then Buddhism will not be attractive. And so that's the point. So I think this is a good point to take a break. Okay. Second half, we'll spend a little bit more time actually going to the spiritual dimension of it. But before that, I have a few more things to point out, and that has to do with this point. Can you read this? 1, 2. Without
a healthy self or self-esteem, one finds it difficult to correctly understand Buddhist teachings and even misuse them to cover up their inadequacy. Spiritual bypassing, using religious or spiritual teachings to bypass or cover up their psychological inadequacies. Those with weak self-esteem use the teaching of non-self to go to the extreme in serving others while forgetting one's own needs. During the Second World War, some Buddhists purposely misappropriated the non-self teaching to promote the idea of destroying the self to serve the nation.
Meshi Hoko. Okay, my voice is getting weaker. Actually, 4 weeks ago, my wife and I, we came down with COVID. And my symptoms were pretty light, except for my throat. And I've noticed that since then, when I sing, it's not as beautiful like before. Anyway, okay, spiritual bypassing. Have you heard this term? Well, it points to, as I say here, you try to cover up your psychological inadequacies, like lack of confidence or fear of someone really getting close to you, well, really revealing yourself. So one example of that is, there are some people who go to the extreme of serving others. They want to forget the self and just work for others. And sometimes, not all, but sometimes it has to do with people who want to kind of cover up their inadequacies and serve others to get the adulations or the praise that you're doing good. And so there is this kind of tendency. And then non-self is appropriated by people like these who use non-self to mean, repress the self, forget about your needs. But in the long run, it never is never fulfilling. So, and this it certainly will lead to burnout. Well, there may be some people, maybe at this temple who have a little bit of that tendency, just serving others and forgetting about your own needs. So and you burn out, and even more. So my point here is that if you have a psychological issue or if you haven't developed a healthy ego or self-esteem, you have a difficulty of interpreting and understanding Buddhism properly. You twist things and not really get to it. And I have known some in the BCA with some people, there are tendencies for people whom I consider to have a little bit of, inadequacies. I just call inadequacies. And they tended to misinterpret the teachings, like in this case. Or, someone who grab onto the teaching of renunciation. In Buddhism, there's an element of renunciation. And person with a weak ego or want to say, renunciation, opposite to the other example is to kind of retreat and renounce the world. But at the same time, you don't have a healthy ego and your need is now fulfilled because ultimately, we all need to relate to others well in a healthy manner. And if you're not, satisfying that need by saying as a Buddhist, I practice renunciation and not really satisfy that need, then you'll never be satisfied. And so they're engaging in spiritual bypassing. And then, non-self is has been misappropriated by this example of the Second World War. This is in Japan, of course, that many Buddhists advocated non-self as a means of telling soldiers that you have to sacrifice yourself because you don't really exist, or you should let go of the self and just go for it and work and give your life to the emperor. I mean, this has been criticized in more recent days because many of the Buddhist organizations became part of the war machine and the propaganda. Of course, in those days in Japan, state was so powerful that the religion had to go along with it. And this happens in many societies, not just Japan, but unfortunately in Japan, they use that non-self as a justification for, just sacrificing yourself. And that is not the meaning of this. So they misunderstood Buddhism. So if you don't have a healthy self or self-esteem, and you can misunderstand and misappropriate Buddhism. Okay? This is a long one. Okay?
If a person suffers from mental issues stemming from childhood abuse, narcissism, and self-hatred, they would have a more difficult time. Buddhist psychologist John Wellwood's client who suffered from childhood abuse. The client needed therapy before pursuing her Buddhist practice. Must have the self in order to get rid of the self, a view of many American Buddhist psychologists. Thus, what I see as the traditional Buddhist attitude of negating even the healthy self needs to be placed in the context of understanding the importance of healthy self or self-esteem. Placing this in the context of our metaphor, we need a healthy self or self-esteem to give us that velocity to climb up. The velocity generated by the dash and the strong pull represents the healthy self, which facilitates our ability to go over the bar.
Okay, so again, the importance of self-esteem, healthy self, that can also help with the Buddhist goal. And before that, I mentioned John Wellwood, and he has a case of a lady who's being abused verbally by her husband. And so she's very distraught, and she goes to her Buddhist teacher, who is a monk. And so he obviously says, well, you have to be patient and practice compassion. So she feels good about it. Okay, so yes, I have to be compassionate and forgiving of what my husband, how he's treating me. But and also she was abused by her own father when she was little. So she has been, traumatized. And so that hasn't healed. And now her husband is abusing her. And the spiritual teacher says, oh, compassion, compassion. But without addressing through therapy, that, trauma of being abused, no matter how much you practice Buddhism, it will never lead to wellness. And so John Wellwood and Buddhist psychology in America often talk about how they need to do psychological therapy for those who suffer from these inadequacies in order to fully engage in Buddhism. And actually, by some estimation, according to some scholars, that half the people who go to these retreats probably involve, though not necessarily the hereditary or people who grew up in Buddhism, but people who are attracted to Buddhism, who grew up in other religions or no religions, they have had difficulties, and they are attracted to Buddhism, but they haven't really worked out their psychological inadequacies, and so they're coming to this realization that you have to really help people with self-esteem in order to understand Buddhism properly. And I think, and so in my metaphor, it has to do with, a healthy ego is equal to the velocity, velocity of dashing toward the bar, and that will enable to go up higher. And so the two are different stages, but they kind of help each other, even to realize the ultimate Buddhist goal. Okay, you're welcome to ask questions anytime. I know I have a lot of material here, so why don't we just? Let me just make this one point, and then we can open it up to the question. So.
Batteries.
So right now we're talking, this is the personal level, and so let's do 8. 1, 2, 3.
Nevertheless, the Buddhist teachings can also support us in the developing of healthy self or self-esteem. In fact, this is the premise of our Dharma school and the existing of our temples. This is especially true in the U.S., which differs somewhat from Japan. moral and ethical teachings. Example, golden chain and the six paramita, or perfections. Teachings that help us to live more in accord with the realities of life, impermanence and interdependence, the metaphor of the wave and the ocean.
Okay, so the B and C I've already talked about, but so I say psychological development, psychology here, and then Buddhism here. But it's not that Buddhism has nothing to do with this section, this level, obviously. I keep saying it's a set. So even for people who may not want to go over, they can benefit from the ethical and moral, teachings. And in America, we have a better history of this through the golden chain. Golden chain is one of the most popular saying, and I think it's probably true here. And it was, do you know when it was written and who wrote it? It was in the probably 30s or 20s in Hawaii by Reverend Dorothy Hunt, who was a minister of the Honganji, and her husband was also a minister, and so she came up with this, saying. It's a beautiful passage that's not found in Japan, obviously. And so when I talk about it, a lot of Japanese people, they said, "Oh, I love it." They really enjoy it. And so that golden chain, is very ethical. It's not so much this part, right? I will think pure and beautiful thoughts, to say pure words, and to do pure and beautiful deeds, knowing that on what I do now depends not only my happiness, but that of others. And it begins by saying, I'll be kind and gentle to every living thing and protect all who are weaker than myself. So it's not like awakening. It is some ways awakening, but it's still very moral, and it speaks to a lot of people, and that is important. And it will help, children and young people to develop the Buddhist ethics, and that is important. Six perfections or paramitas. Did you know that in Japan, Jodo Shinshu Buddhists have nothing to do with this? They don't practice six perfections, no paramitas. So in America, we practice this, especially at the Ohigan, right? The equinox services. They say the weather is beautiful. Half the day is daytime and nighttime, so it's a perfect weather to practice and practice six perfections. That kind of a teaching doesn't exist in Jodo Shinshu in America, in Japan. It was started probably pre-war, and probably Reverend. We don't know exactly who is most responsible, but one of the persons is, I think, his name doesn't come to me right now. But anyway, and that's because in America, Jodo Shinshu needed something more ethical and moral. In Japan, they don't need it because they have something that is very general in society. But in America, we need ethics and morality based on your religion. So when Shinshu came to America, the teachers before the war said, we need one. And so they pushed six perfections and also Eightfold Path. That is also not practiced by Jodo Shinshu people. And so this is, it goes to show the importance of how Buddhism can, help with this dimension. Okay, so teaching of impermanence and interdependence can really help us to, in a way, help to enhanced self-esteem as well. I guess, if you realize that you are dependent on others and we're indebted to them, they develop a greater sense of, gratitude, and you become a softer and more pliable person and become a better person to get along with. And so the impermanence and interdependence, again, are two key teachings that are throughout Buddhism, and also, of course, in Joro Shinshu. And then the metaphor, the wave and ocean, expresses. Okay, so any questions or thoughts so far? Don't be shy. This is a seminar. You're supposed to.
They're very shy. But I have the microphone.
Yeah, yeah.
I know one guy, we can count on him to... You don't have to have a question, you can just comment.
Well, no, it's, well, thank you very much for this perspective. And I overheard you talking to Teresa and Janet about your perspective, maybe from the Higashi side, Nishi side. There may be some confusion of that, but at what point does it kind of become similar? I mean, I know there's two kind of trains of thought. Is there a point where the teachings are the same?
Oh, you're talking about the difference between Higashi and Nishi. And, well, basic teachings are the same, Amida Buddha, Shinjin, but it's a matter of emphasis. I think that the West, the Nishi, tends to emphasize the Amida part, and then Higashi tends to emphasize the seeker's part, experiential dimension. So in a way, I tend to be more Higashi-oriented, and because I emphasize more the experiential, because I'm basically was raised in America, and my perspective is American. But I know that there are many people in Japan who thrive in the tradition. I think religion can be very tradition-oriented, and as it should be, but too much emphasis on tradition fails to make it interesting for, the people in that period, because as we know, religion has to adapt to the culture. And I think that's the point that I'm making. In America, we emphasize the self and the individual and the experience, and that's why I am saying we have to emphasize this dimension as well. And there are kind of subtle differences, yeah.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that, because yesterday at our Shinen Enkai, I kind of brought that up, that our tradition respects tradition and heritage. We had, with the chanting and all that, but yet here we are in the modern context in America.
Yeah.
And how that teaching has come. And it's definitely, I feel, and maybe it's Reverend Harada too, that kind of started that kind of feeling of the experiential, right? The everyday. Well, he was kind of mentored by Kubose, right? The everyday suchness. You and I kind of talked about that last night.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think Reverend Harada and Reverend Matsumoto, and I include myself, we have been influenced by a teacher named Shigaraki. Have you heard of him? Professor Takamaro Shigaraki, he was a professor and also president of Ryukoku University. And so he was the teacher to Reverend Matsumoto and Reverend Harada. And and I have, though I wasn't I'm a little bit older than two, so I didn't go to Ryukoku, but I translated for him when he was at IBS for 2 years. So I got very much influenced by him. And he is progressive. So he emphasizes more the experiential dimension and how we understand it. And so, but he is, he was criticized by there's a more dominant traditional position. But I feel like, we need to have, progressives and the conservative dimension and talk to each other. And, but unfortunately in Japan, they don't do that so much. So anyway, Yeah, this one here. Okay.
I'm going to ask a difficult question, but I'll tell you why, and maybe that. I think it's. How are you defining the bar, awakening, Xinjing? And I'm asking because the way I'm hearing it is described as a one-time experience, and I have heard other ministers talk about sort of our path of Xinjing, and that sometimes you can, or path two, and that sometimes you can have sort of small experiences of awakening.
Yeah.
And I guess I was also thinking maybe sometimes somebody starts toward like a more vertical path, and they have and they kind of progressively.
Yeah.
So I was just curious if you mean, if you're thinking of it sort of at the time of death, like a final thing, or yeah, if you could just talk more about it.
Okay.
And thank you so much.
Okay, I'm talking basically about Xinjing, okay? Well, you know what Xinjing is, right? Xinjing. I mentioned at the very top. This is the awakening experience for Joro Shinshu. So we have to be clear about what we're talking about. And now, as you say, there are different interpretations of what Xinjing entails. One thing is clear, it's in this life. This life. No, so, not afterlife. That is not, that's clear. So now, it's in this life, but is it one big bang or small little sparkles, And I think it's both. And what is important is that whether it's one big experience or many little sparkles that you experience, what is important is afterwards, you look back before these experiences and you say, I'm better. I'm more spiritually well off. I have made progress. So I think that it depends on people. Some people have, many small awakenings in life, and some people have a big bang, but they also probably have small insights. But whatever, it will grow and develop to a point where when you look back, you're much better off than before, and you feel like my passage today, oh, how happy I am. My heart and my mind are planted in the soil of Amita's in the soil of Amita's compassion. So it's that kind of a, sense of spiritual well-being that one feels, and we can have many aha moments, and so just rely on your experience, and again, what is important is the result. When you compare now to the past. And for Shinran, he had kind of a big bang experience at the age of 29 when he met Honan. And then I think, after that, he had small, sparkles and insights on the way. And at the end, it probably was much deeper, yeah. So that's my response. Do you have any further questions or comments?
No, thank you.
Yeah. And I do want to add one other thing. Today I said it in the Japanese section, is that unfortunately in Japan they talk a lot about Shinjin, but people are kind of afraid to talk about it. It's the most important thing, but people don't want to talk about it, partly because Renyo Shonin, that guy over there, that person, that saint, Renyo, he said, those who don't have it, or the Shinjin, talk about it. But those who really have it don't talk about it. They're being, it's kind of the model. And those who have it need to talk. And that's obvious, but that's kind of placed discourage discussion. But one thing that I think is important is that if you are making a sincere, sustained effort for, I would say, at least several years, and you come to a temple, you come to seminars like this, and read books, and if you're really sincere and interested, that is almost a sign that you have Shinjin. And this is probably, go against the orthodoxy, but I've been, writing articles to back this up, and I can cite Shinran passages that will support this view. So the fact that you are interested, you want to learn, and that means that you have been touched by the workings of Amida. So have confidence in the fact that you came today, not because you're going to win any brownie points. You came because you're interested. That means that you've been touched by the workings of Amida, and that is a sign of Shinjin. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the metaphors, and I wanted to add between the pole vaulting, because I love watching it during the Olympics,
Yeah.
and they don't always get over, and they have to make the adjustments and feel it. And so that letting go is different times at different moments. And so I was thinking what Marcia was also thinking. So I think it's multiple attempts. We're always running towards this bar. Sometimes we hit it, sometimes we don't. And I like the wave metaphor too, because I surf quite a bit.
Wow.
And so catching the wave, you've got to feel it. And then you got to let go once you drop in, and then feel that energy. Because you fight it, then you wipe out. But what I do like is there's always another wave to try it. And so I think, Marcia, that sometimes you make it over, sometimes you don't. Or at least I make it over sometimes. And sometimes I don't make every wave. But is that kind of the
Yeah,
same?
well, I think making over the bar is not just one time. It's commitment to overcoming the Buddhist. So I use the word ultimate Buddhist goal. Ultimate Buddhist goal is not moral and ethical only, but it's a spiritual awakening. And so, yeah, I mean, it just symbolizes the effort to realize the spiritual awakening, and it can take, many efforts, and you may fail, but I don't really consider failing. It's more, even if you don't see it or if you think it's a failure, just keep going and it will deepen. And what's important is sustained effort and sincerity. And what's important, of course, is that we have to be careful of self-power. Self-power is a feeling that whatever I'm doing is a cause that will lead to awakening. But we have to be more humble and say that, I'm making the effort, and whatever awakening I feel, it's not me causing it, but it's ultimately the working of Amida, or working of the Sangha and the people around you. So I wouldn't get too caught up on the, one time, many times, or fail, whatever. The thing is to keep, moving forward, and maybe enjoy the process. Okay, good.
Hi, I have my own mic. Let me try this. So I really like this topic because it has brought questions. So one of the things that I've always thought about is, I like this thing, the theme you have of self-esteem. When you talked about it, one of the things in America, I was born here, so I don't have your good experience of living in Japan, but you read things about how the differences between Japan and here, and you hear the difference between how we in America stress more the individual, whereas in Japan and Asia, they more stress the group.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of gets into the whole thing about being individually, pushing individualism here, and also gets into the issue of self-power versus other power, which we hear a lot. So when when you hear those words here, I don't know that we've translated correctly, but self-power is something that Americans are brought up. That's the way you're brought up. You are self-power. This other power, well, that's like you're not American. Almost to some people, it could be translated that way. So I see that as a thing that it's good to address it with this. And you put in the word passive. Well, no, I put in the word. When we were talking, you were talking about how to characterize self-esteem. I think passive was a good word that you put in, because I do think in America, Buddhism is viewed as more passive than like Christianity, which was much more active. And so, those differences between active and passive and, and self-esteem and so this is a very good, I really appreciate your topic.
Yeah.
And the 6 paramitas, I also thought about that. If they don't teach in Japan, one of the things is if emphasizing the group is more prevalent in Asia, which seems to be, then in America you need that because you don't get that cultural concept in America, focusing on the group. So you need things like the ethics for the individual to be able to kind of move over more towards that part. So anyway, just some thoughts. So thank you very much for your talk today.
Yeah. I think any true religion, even Christianity, does talk about God. Obviously, God is so dominant. So religion, Christianity is part of American religion. So it does, Christianity does emphasize the other power. And so it's the nature of religion to do so. But the point that I'm making is that in Buddhism, it's not just that, but it has the importance of practice, Actually, so this gets into another whole area of Jodo Shinshu controversy where people say, well, you don't need to do any self-power practice. 6 perfections or eightfold path. But in my view, I think that it's not mandatory, but I think for those who feel a need for it, I think it's good to practice. Shinran definitely did. He spent 20 years doing the 6 perfections practices. So the idea that Shinran provided us the result or the conclusion so we don't have to do it, that's not really, it doesn't go with the whole theory of religious education. Just because the teacher said so, that doesn't mean that you can really appreciate what he or she went through, right? So I feel like as a Buddhist, we need to do more practice. And so when I say Buddhism is a religion of awakening and not only of faith, I'm emphasizing that dimension. In order to awaken, you have to go through transformation, change. And so actually, Buddhism is more like martial arts or arts, flower arrangement, tea ceremony, judo, kendo. And if you look at them, it's not that they just believe in something that they don't fully understand, but it's a process, a long path of nitty-gritty work to cultivate yourself and to change yourself. And Jodo Shinshu is really no different. We do have practice, we don't call it practice, and that's listening to the Dharma, Listening to the Dharma is you can look at it as a form of practice. But traditionally we don't say that's practice, but I think it's really practice. Don't you think so? You need to have a lot of effort to come to temple to listen, and to listen well. That takes a lot of effort. And so I think that Buddhism without practice is really not real Buddhism, and in my opinion. So, okay, yes.
Thank you, Sensei. Aaron brought up some really good points. I was thinking along the same lines when he started speaking about the role of culture. When we have a cultural marinade, the Japanese nationals, have the collectivist society. We have a very individualistic society which often falls short in reality or in its ideal. So I think as Americans, even if you're Japanese-born American, we have further to go to get to this idea of non-self. And we have a lot of unlearning to do because we're caught up in our own cultural marinade of rugged individualism, and it's all about the self. So I was just, those were some of the things that I was thinking about when Aaron was talking and you were talking, the process of unlearning.
Yeah.
I was also thinking about the ideal of American individualism and where it falls short and how valuable Buddhism has been. I think when the ideal falls short, as it's appearing to really fall short right now, and a lot of people are dissatisfied in our current political climate, for example. And I think it leaves us wide open to not knowing what to do when that ideal falls short. And it has a tendency to maybe have us lean towards authoritarianism because we just throw up our hands and want someone to fix it for us because we're not used to working together as a group to fix things. So those are just some of the things that I was thinking about when.
Yeah. Okay, so both of you have emphasized the reality of individualism, strong sense of individualism. So are you, and if I hear you correctly, you're saying that that is not satisfactory. You got to deal with that, right? Isn't that what you're saying?
It's not satisfactory because it's not really true. When you start to evaluate it, and when you, especially if you hold the Buddhist lens up to it, you get challenged in your ideals.
Okay.
So you have farther to go, in a sense, to learn how to be a Buddhist.
Okay.
As an American.
I see. So, but my point is that we have to accept the fact that we're our individualistic culture. So it's this level, and that's a fact. And so, even at this level, before the break or after the break, I said, the golden chain and the 6 perfections, they are the tools and the teachings that can maybe soften that individualism. That's why, we're teaching this here at the temple, I'm sure. And so, but at the same time, I'm also saying that we have to face the fact that that in other aspects of our lives, individualism or ego is important for our economic life, to get ahead. I mean, so as we're not monks and nuns, and we have to make a living, so that part is important. So it's a tricky balance between, egotistical way of living and also taking in the Buddhist perspective. So it's a balancing act, and so another point I'm saying is that in that process, the traditional Buddhism is just simply saying no selfishness or individualism or self-esteem is bad, but what I'm saying is that not so fast, and just kind of acknowledge that and then cultivate that. And of course, at the very end, if you're going for the ultimate awakening, you have to somehow really deal with that, as you say, the rugged individualism or ego. And that's true in any religion, And so, it's a set. It's a set that need to be acknowledged. 2 parts of a set. And yes.
So Sensei, this is again.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining a lot of it, but say you have the pole, you're running, you have the pole, and you don't know how to let go. You said letting go is important?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'm confused about other power and amida, because hearing at church, they're saying, I can't do it by myself. I've got to let go and have faith, or you might call it grace, that it's not me, that it's amida is always over here, and that's the other power. So where does other power and amida fit in
Yeah.
to letting go of the pole?
Yeah, I think we, even though we talk about other power, we do on an individual let go. I mean, and then maybe, metaphors are limited, so you can't cover everything, but maybe that velocity that carries you up there, and then when you take the initiative to let go, you even go higher, and that whole, it's not all you, there's that velocity and then going over, and that can be considered maybe other power. But I don't have the ability to include that other power too much in this metaphor. But I think the letting go is something that you need to do, but you are taught by somebody, not you, someone else, teacher, minister, teachings, and told you to let go, and that teaching didn't come from you, it came from the other. So that's another aspect of it. But flying through, there is a, air, maybe the air, allows, that's another power. But there's definitely, can't cover everything in this parable, but I think, letting go is really letting go to the other, and so there's an element of other power. So anyway, I think, in the letting go, there is a entering the other power dimension.
I don't mean to hog the mic, but it's still in my hands.
Yeah.
So listening to the conversation, letting go, because I just thought there's another power, which is that cultural power. Like here, we're learning about or questioning and trying to understand this other power to let go. But then we leave here, and then there's that cultural power that says, hold on, like grip it. And so I think what you're saying is trying to find that balance between letting go of our pre-self ego so we can get over the bar, or for me, drop into the wave and get a good ride, or whatever. And therein lies the conflict, right? I guess my question is there, do you see that as a conflict between the other power here and then the power that we drive into when we leave the parking lot? And then how do we
when you
reconcile
meant
that?
cultural, what are you referring to?
Well, you had said, there's all these forces or powers, and so, you said, our teachers tell us to let go. But then when we leave here, our culture tells us to hold on. That American individual culture.
Well, then
you can do it all on your own.
yeah,
you don't
but
need
then
anybody.
that's where you, having been influenced by what the temple teaches, and that becomes an important part. And so you have to take the initiative to not be overwhelmed by the cultural, mores or values. And so the stronger you feel you are embedded in the teachings, you will be able to counter whatever, the pressures of secular society. So you got to find a balance. So, and one thing I would say also, this gets confusing, but in Joro Shinshu, we cannot totally let go of our ego. So that's a little complicated. Again, you can't cover everything in a metaphor because, Shinran says we're, till the end of our lives, we're, foolish, ordinary beings. And actually, well, let's get, we get rid of some afflictions or blind passion. And I'm not equipped to talk about it today, but with Shinjin, there is an elimination of some of the 6 afflictions in Mahayana Buddhism, which is basically more a change in our perspective. And that, but the deep-seated one like gasp, gas, greed, anger, stupidity, and pride, that we cannot overcome as Jodo Shinshu Buddhists. And I like that because I think it's so realistic. But we have, in a way, kind of appreciated a sense of, that this ego or this self is not absolute, and that we are connected like the wave in the ocean. And that is a change in perspective. A lot of Americans are probably, just focused on the wave. Look at me, I'm the great wave, and doing this, but they don't really see the ocean and how indebted it is. But Jodo Shinshu, we are still the wave, and we have our pride and all that, but we also understand that we are part of a greater whole. And ocean is actually, in a way, you can look at it as Amida, And so, okay. All right, let's, great questions and comments, and we kind of talked about this seminar being only 2 hours, so probably we cannot go too much further, right? But what do you want to do?
I know Sensei, you could talk a couple more hours, huh? Easily.
I could, but I could just, maybe just not do the last 2 parts, but make 2 points.
You want to do a couple more points?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So, this is anyone who's taking my Buddhist course. I know Mary's taking my Buddhist course, and I bring this up a lot. This one here. So, let's read the difference. The difference between difficulties and suffering. Basic premise of Buddhism. Horizontal, the objective world, what happens to us. Vertical, the subjective realm, workings of my mind, how I receive and respond to what happens on the horizontal level. Difficulties are mandatory, but suffering is optional. Sacred words from a graffiti in a public toilet wall. So actually this passage, the second half, suffering is optional. I actually entered a public toilet somewhere in Central Valley many years ago, and on a graffiti it says suffering is optional, and I had my Shinjin awakening. No, yeah. And so I really like that suffering is optional. Easier said than done, but then I added the difficulties are mandatory or inevitable. So on a horizontal level, this is the objective realm, the realm in which you work, the temple, what really happens to us, okay? So we all live in that realm. Right now we're all living on this seminar, activity which is taking place on the horizontal. And at this level, difficulties are mandatory. They happen. What's the definition of difficulty? Things that don't go your way, basically. Things that you don't like, anything from Dodgers losing to Kamala Harris losing, anything that doesn't go your way, and they happen a lot. But how you take that and receive it or respond to it is the vertical level. This is the spiritual, the Buddhist. So you can say that the Buddha has gone all the way to the top. He's mastered his gasp, and he's attained higher level. So when say Dodgers lose, because I'm not as high up there, will kind of suffer. Why do they lose? And they should have done better and all that. But the Buddha will say, well, it was a nice game. Everybody, the weather was nice and people played and nobody got hurt and essentially it was good activity and so there's no suffering for him. But for someone who is attached and full of gasp will suffer. So that's why I say difficulties are not necessarily suffering. And so we all know that whatever happens on the horizontal depends on your perspective. So, so the Dodgers win 5-3 to the Athletics. So the Dodger fan will be elated, but the Athletics fans will suffer. It's the same activity, right? It's the same event, but depending on the content of your subjectivity will determine whether you suffer or not. And the Buddha is someone who has overcome that kind of maybe bias, or what do you want to call it, gasp, or gas, or any kind of expectation will be much more open, and anything is fine, basically. So the suffering is optional. And this kind of goes to the Dharma talk I had today, that, Buddha had the view that, whatever difficulty you think you're having, you're only 1 yard above the ground. Whereas those who are less enlightened think you're 100 yards above the ground. Okay, so this part I'm going to skip because we just don't have time, and maybe you can invite me again in 5 years. If I'm,
5 months.
if, and then maybe this one is more Joro Shinshu-ish. So, okay, 1, 2, 3.
Being ordinary, foolish beings, we are unable to fully, sometimes, not even a little, live up to the Buddhist ideals. In Shin Buddhism,
Our awakening in Shinjin is guaranteed, for we are already within the realm of Amida's vow power. If the ocean is Amida's vow power, we are already embraced by the ocean and will continue to be part of the ocean even after the wave disappears to help produce new waves. Okay, so here's the difference between general Buddhism and Joro Shinshu Buddhism. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we just went over this. Shinran Shonin practiced 20 years on Mount Hiei, and he didn't get to the very top like the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. That's why he really suffered, or he was pained. And so you can say he was maybe halfway up, above the horizontal, and that's where, and so he was struggling. You probably heard about his struggles, and he was really tormented as to how to overcome his inability to reach the top. I mean, it really pained him, because that was his goal, to overcome the gasp, but he couldn't. And then he goes to see his teacher Honen, and what Honen basically told him, he says, even if you're halfway up from the vertical horizontal, and you haven't reached it, don't worry, you are already embraced in Amida's compassion or Amida's vow. So you are in that circle of compassion, circle of Amida. So you don't need to go anywhere. In this life, you'll not become get over all the greed, hatred, and ignorance, but you feel, a spiritual joy and happiness that he mentioned, and that at the end of life, you will be part of the Amida Buddha, Dharmakaya or Tathagata or Amida Buddha, whatever you want to call it, the ultimate reality has embraced you, and it will embrace you after death. And so it's a matter of not going anywhere on the vertical, but reframing as something with a circle, I call it circle of compassion of Amida Buddha. And realizing that you are embraced. Just like the wave, you realize that you are part of the wave, and that even though it will ultimately disappear, but you are connected to that ultimate reality we call ocean. And there is a passage which I have been very happy to find and realize, and it's not talked about very much, in Kyogyo Shinsho. He talks about the light of Amida, light and name. Name is Namo Amida Butsu, and the light. These are two expressions of Amida's working. And it's said that it's constantly working. And then he talks about what is called karmic consciousness, goshiki or goshiki. And he says, my karmic consciousness unites, merges with a light and life in this life, which is Shinjin. And then I become the true body in the Pure Land. So how I interpret that is that in this life you become one with the light and light and life, or light and name, and then so that means you are already, you're like the ocean wave in the ocean. You're connected. You finally realize it. It's always been there. It's been there for since eternity, and you realize it. And then with that, you know that you are, even after death, you're part of it. So in Jodo Shinshu, we talk about coming back. That's what makes it, Jodo Shinshu, very different from Judeo-Christian religions, because in the Judeo-Christian, you go to heaven and you never come back. You're part of, God and the side. But Jodo Shinshu, you return, and I interpret as you return as part of Amida's compassion. And then you participate in the ongoing workings to help others and lead others to the same kind of reality. So in a sense, I feel like, one of the reasons why I got into Buddhism was my fear of death. At the age of 15, I realized that I'm going to die, and so my parents, my brothers, and I was horrified. And then, after a long time through the Dharma, I have, gradually, talking about gradual or the sudden, gradually have come to, realization that I am part of this great compassion of Amida, and that I'm fine, and that after death, I'll be fine. And so that kind of perspective and that realization has given me, happiness to a great extent compared to the past. I'm still an ordinary foolish being, so, I've been telling you since I live in Japan half the time in summer, spring and autumn, and winters and summer in California, I have ideal weather. It's like the Pure Land. One of the descriptions of Pure Land is that the weather is mild. But I keep saying, I live in like I'm in a Pure Land, but I don't want to go to the real Pure Land just yet. That's the example of being a Bonbo. And so I think that in whatever ways, in Jodo Shinshu, we need to feel and gotta awaken to the fact that we are part of this, what we call other power, workings of other power. And we use different names like Amida Buddha, wisdom, compassion, Tathagata, or Dharmakaya. And so Amida is not a creator, like the Judeo-Christian God, which is, I think, is a salvation, in my opinion, because that gets into a whole lot of problem for Christians, in my opinion, in that, they have to, why did the God create this world full of difficulties? But with Amida Buddha, he or it or she or whatever you want to call it is not responsible for that, but simply is unconditional compassion to help us awaken to this sense of oneness and sense of, great life to which we are part of. And when we awaken to that and feel that to some extent, you feel a sense of satisfaction and gratitude, and you know that you are not going to disappear. You will be part of this great reality. And let's conclude by reading this again as a kind of and we'll end in 5 minutes. Okay. So Jim, you disappeared after a while, so are you still going to read? Okay. Okay, so you please lead us. Okay, so we're going to go through about 7 passages which summarizes in what we discussed, except for one part that I skipped, and that can be for 5 years from now. Hopefully not that long because,
Yeah, here you go.
Okay.
Oh, now it's going. Now it's going. Ready? Okay.
Yep.
In closing, self-esteem or healthy self that psychology recognizes does not contradict the teaching of non-self or letting go of the self that Buddhism advocates. They are qualities found at 2 different stages of human development toward flourishing and well-being. They, in fact, can be seen to form an integral set.
Okay, B.
The two represent the ingredients for human mental flourishing and spiritual well-being. In the pole vaulting metaphor, self-esteem or healthy self is needed in one's dash, carrying the pole towards the bar while letting go of the attachment to the self is needed to go over the bar. So the healthy self is important in order to clear the bar. While self-esteem or healthy ego are necessary to function well socially in the world, it is limited, for it cannot deal with the difficulties and suffering that come from changes such as those of illness, aging, and death. This leads some people to seriously seek a resolution through Buddhism, as we saw with Shakyamuni Buddha and Shinran Shonin. They become models for us Buddhists as we seek to emulate what they accomplished. However, there are people, even among Buddhists, who do not feel the extreme suffering and thus not feel the urgency or need to go over the bar. They may very well make the dash, but just continue to run under the bar while still leading a Buddhist life focused on morality and ethics as represented in the golden chain. They should continue to be encouraged to clear the bar, but such people should be included as valuable for our Sangha. The failure to nurture a self-esteem or healthy self can make it difficult to correctly or sufficiently understand and appreciate the Buddhist teachings. Even if awakening in Buddhism represents the higher stage in human well-being, the Buddhist teachings can foster and enhance the quality of the personal stage and thus one's self-esteem and healthy self. It can also nurture a greater desire for awakening at the next stage. At the personal stage, we can benefit from the Buddhist teachings such as impermanence, interdependence, and compassion. As tangible examples of such teachings, we focused today on 1, the metaphor of the wave and the ocean, 2, the difference between difficulties and suffering, 3, observing the mind using the framework of 5 aggregates, and 4, the workings of compassion, which we call Amida's vow.
Okay, so we conclude.
Oh, how happy I am. My heart and mind are planted in the soil of universal vow of Amida, and I allow my thoughts and aspirations to flow in the inconceivable Dharma ocean.
Okay, so I hope that you have already experienced even a bit of this, and if not, continue to aspire uh, to experience it for yourself, because that goes to the heart of what Shin Buddhism is all about. So as we do that, may we help each other, because that's what the Sangha is. And I'm sure with great teachers and great environment, you will definitely make some inroads into your spiritual aspirations. Let's close the Gassho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namanda